All right. Hey guys, welcome back to the second episode of the African Mavericks Podcast. I'm your host, Ebuka Mwana. And over here, what we're trying to achieve is promoting independent thinking and purposeful living amongst young Africans, with the ultimate goal of encouraging and inspiring our listeners to bet on their truth. And I know to some of you that may sound unsexy, but if for whatever reason that resonates with you, please stick around. Because on today's episode, I had the privilege to have a wonderful conversation with Adaeze Onwumere. Adaeze shares her incredible journey from studying in the Ivy Leagues to impacting financial inclusion in Africa. She discusses the resilience and adaptability needed to navigate multiple careers and cultural landscapes, offering insights into the power of embracing one's unique path and the courage to innovate and lead with empathy. Join me on this wonderful conversation, and I hope you find it as enlightening and inspiring as I did. Let's dive right in.
So, Dezzy, if you wouldn't mind, can you share a background of your story and how you got to where you are today? How eventually got you to what you're doing today?
That's such a broad question, but I will try and be concise.
Yeah.
So I was born in Nigeria. I was born in Enugu. But my parents relocated to the UK when I was a few months old. So I spent most of my life in the UK, in South London. So I'm a South London girl in Croydon specifically. And save for a year where my parents moved me back to Nigeria, myself and my siblings back to Nigeria, to Enugu. And I did primary 2 in Enugu before going back to the UK. So, I mean, my upbringing was pretty regular. African parents, high standards, high expectations. And I mean, I would say a lot of support. My parents were typical African immigrant parents. The only thing I would say that distinguished them is that they, my dad's a doctor, my mom's a lawyer, and there was kind of always that hope. But even when, for instance, when I was applying to university, I woke up and told my parents that I wanted to study theology. And my mom said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "I want to study theology." And she said, "Okay." She said, "Okay." She said, "I believe in you." And I think that's one thing about my parents. For whatever reason, they just always believed in my ability to make choices for myself. So when I said I wanted to study theology, they were like, "Sure." And then, I mean, obviously, I grew up in the UK. And then I also had a lot of cousins, like a lot of Nigerians, I had a lot of cousins in the US. And I had a particular cousin called Adora, who is my role model. And just was a very big force in my life and influence. And she had gone to Princeton. And I had decided at some point that I wanted to go to Princeton. And so my parents were like, I went to a public school in the UK. So in the UK, they call private schools public schools, and then public schools comprehensive schools. So it's just like a regular public school. I went to a regular public school. Nobody in my school had ever been to university in the US. And it was just kind of an unheard of thing. My mom was like, "Okay." But again, my parents were like, "Okay, you want to go to the US? No problem." They didn't necessarily know how to help me, but they were like, "Sure." And then I ended up going to the US. I ended up at Yale, which is a place that I loved. It was an incredible experience. I loved Yale. And I ended up not studying theology. I think, and my parents, they were fine. I ended up studying political science and African studies, and just loved the experience. Loved the opportunity to grow intellectually. I think I learned more. I always say, actually, I learned more outside of the classroom on Yale's campus than I even did inside the classroom. And just with the kind of environment it was. And then when I was graduating, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But obviously had been on this high achieving track. It's now you need to get a job, apply for things. So I'd gotten a job in the UK with a consulting firm. I'd gotten a job in New York with an African bank, actually, because I was always very passionate about the continent. But then when I was in my senior year, I had and career journeys are so interesting and winding, and there's a lot of luck involved. So I had a classmate. Actually, she wasn't my classmate. She was the year below me, but she was a Rwandan genocide survivor called Clementine Wamaria. And she sat on the board of the Holocaust Museum in DC with a gentleman called Strive Masiwa, who is the founder and executive chairman of the Econet Group, which is one of the largest telco, I think they call them TMT, technology, media, and telecommunications groups on the continent, indigenous. And they had discussed doing an internship program that would bring young Africans from the diaspora back home. And I remember she had asked me if I would apply, and I was like, no, I already have a job. It's my senior year, my senior summer. I just want to relax and spend time with my family. But she was so generous, and she was like, come on, let's go to South Africa. You've never been. We'll have a great time. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I said, you know what? That's true. So I went to South Africa with her and a group of some of my very close friends. My best friend was also on the internship program. And we went to South Africa, and I ended up enjoying the work so much. We were in South Africa, we were in Zimbabwe, we spent a little bit of time. We traveled to Lesotho on that trip. And I loved it. And then I met Mr. Masiwa, who is the founder of the group, and he didn't know me from anywhere, and he just said, I think that you're meant to be on the continent, and I think that you're meant to be at the Econet Group, and I would like to make you a full-time offer. It was so random. Providence, chance, luck, you can call it whatever you want. And I ended up taking the offer. And it was really interesting because it was another one of those moments where I told my parents, and my parents were just dismayed. They were like, you have an offer in New York, you have an offer in London. What are you doing going to South Africa? But again, my mom didn't understand, but she was like, it's okay, sure. I took a huge pay cut, and I packed up my life and moved to Johannesburg. I didn't know anyone. I didn't have any friends. My best friend, she was actually 2 years younger than me. So she was still in college when I moved full-time to Johannesburg. And yeah, so I was there, and I started on a grad scheme, and happened to, at the time, a year or so after I had joined full-time, Econet had just launched their mobile money business in Zimbabwe and in their other markets. And it was really at the time where mobile money was really just starting to take off on the continent. Their product, EcoCash, actually ended up being ranked the #1 mobile money deployment in the world by the GSMA. I think the year was 2016 or so. So it's a very successful mobile money deployment. And I was so fortunate to have been part of the building and rolling out of that moment, not just in the Econet Group, but on the continent of mobile money in the very early stages. And I got to learn a lot. So I lived a baby girl life in Joburg for a while. But my time in Johannesburg was very heavily punctuated with significant periods of time outside of South Africa in other markets. So I did a lot of traveling across the continent, which was incredible. I also spent a lot of time in Zimbabwe, which is one of our biggest markets. And I remember Mr. Masiwe would always say, you need to get sand in your boots. and he like I recall, like he often wasn't around, but when I would meet with him, he would just wake up and say, you need to get some sand in your boots. You're moving to Harare. So like overnight, I would move out. I was just starting to find roots in Johannesburg, and then I was off to Harare. Those experiences were incredible. I learned so much. I enjoyed the culture. I think I truly learned what it meant to be an African and a Pan-Africanist, because a lot of times Nigerians are so Nigerian that sometimes we don't have a strong enough appreciation for other African cultures, and also like what it means to have a broader African identity. So I did that, learned a lot about fintech before fintech was a thing. I say before fintech was sexy. And then in 2016, I don't know if I want to say this, but I guess I have to. In 2016, I met somebody who would turn out to be my co-founder online.
Okay.
We met on Tinder. So we met on Tinder. He had been visiting Johannesburg. At the time, I was in Johannesburg, but I hadn't been active on Tinder whilst he was in town. So by the time I now got on Tinder, he was no longer in town. He was in town for work. At the time, he was working for Microsoft, and he was in a Pan-African role, so he traveled a lot. And so we just ended up talking. And of course, he wasn't in town. He didn't come back the whole time I was there. So we became friends. It was a very, very much platonic relationship. And he from the moment we started talking and became friends, he started telling me that he wanted to start a fintech in Nigeria, that he was seeing all the impact that mobile money was making in other parts of Africa, and it wasn't really having the same impact in Nigeria. And he just really wanted to start a fintech. Of course, I was already working in mobile money. I was super happy. I was living my baby girl life. So it took a few years for me to agree. And then in 2019, I applied to business school. 2018, I applied to business school. I applied round one and I got in early. So I had almost a year before I was supposed to start school. And so he finally convinced me to quit my job and move back to Nigeria. And again, my parents were like, you're quitting your job? And at that time, I had like I mentioned, when I first moved to Joburg, I took this massive pay cut. And at that time, I had just started making like really good money. I was a COO. I was like doing really well. And they were like, don't you want to save for business school? And I was like, no, I'm going to go to Nigeria and do a startup. And they just didn't understand. And they're like, okay, this guy has come again. No problem. They're like, no problem.
Quick question. Are you the only child?
No, not at all. I have
Okay.
I have 3 siblings. I have an older brother.
Okay.
He's like, every child is different, but I imagine he caused them a lot less stress than I did, just because I was always doing weird things. And then my younger sister also, she's a doctor, everybody's, dream child. And then my younger brother, he's a little bit like me. I think he and my sister were super close, but when he was going to college, I convinced him to take a gap year. And he came to South Africa and lived with me for a year. And we just had an incredible time. And then he ended up going to university in the US. And I mean, he's everybody loves him. But yeah, he was much easier than me, I would say. But yeah. So
back to your story. The reason why I asked was like, it was giving me only child vibes. Like, like, hey, just do whatever you want to do.
No. My parents are also very typically African, Nigerian parents. So it actually probably was very flummoxing for them to even just keep allowing me to do all these weird things.
Yeah, that's not typical African parents.
I know. They actually also didn't even stress me. They would always just be like, this is weird, but okay, we trust you. And
that part, the trust.
Yeah, so I moved back to Nigeria and started Aku alongside my co-founder, and we started building, and then I went to business school, and then whilst I was in business school, I was working remotely actually, and then COVID happened. But before COVID happened, what had been a very, very I think when I was in Lagos, whilst we were working on Aku full time, we were co-founders. We spent a lot of time together. And then obviously I went away to school and we were spending a lot less time together. You know, when you have distance, I think it gives perspective. Like you were saying in the mindfulness exercise, it gives you the opportunity to take a step back and reflect. And I think in that distance, there was a realization that we were building something great, but there was also an opportunity to build something else that could also be great. And so he came to visit me in Boston, and I started
I
school.
think I know where this is leading, but
I
keep
started
going.
I started school in August 2019, and in February 2020, he came to Boston and proposed. So it's very fast. Yeah, and so we've been building ever since. We have been we also have a third co-founder who is a longtime friend of mine from South Africa. I've known our third co-founder. His name is Duke. I've known him longer than I've known my husband. So, but they're now bros. They're probably closer than Umo and I are. So then Umo joined us, and after I had graduated, we started trying to raise funds in 2021. It's kind of an unfortunate timeline, just because if you followed like the heyday of venture capital and like tech startups and fundraising, we missed the boom era. Kind of like the end of it a little bit. That's what we did. We applied for our banking license in 2021, and then just like started doing the thing very seriously, and that's brought us to kind of where we are today.
Oh, such a beautiful story. Very beautiful story. I love the fact that you are aware of, or you're humble enough to appreciate how Providence has played a role in your life, even from finding your co-founder turned husband on Tinder.
I thought I didn't want to. He's gonna kill me if he ever sees this. But absolutely,
this is perfect ad for Tinder, by the way.
I know.
So if in sharing that story, you had mentioned a few influential people and few pivotal moments. Can you like pinpoint, maybe one or two pivotal moments that are like, okay, it's because of this experience that I ended up here?
Yes, absolutely. So for instance, I spoke about my friend with whom I went to university, Clementine Wamaria. And she was just like, she is such a generous person. So, when you're in college, everyone's hustling for internships, and she's just never the kind of person who is only interested in herself. She's always interested in the collective. And so instead of, looking to just secure an internship for herself, she's like, no, how can I carry as many people along as possible for an incredible experience? And if she hadn't been that way, I would have never ended up in South Africa. She presented an opportunity to me on a platter and then still had to beg me to take it. And I'm like, who am I? How fortunate am I that she is so generous? And I remember whilst we were on the internship, she told me this story about how when she was still in Rwanda, she would go to mass every morning with her mother. And on her way back, I think she had 6 siblings or so, or 5. And they would come back from mass, and her mother would always buy a piece of chocolate or a piece of toffee. And for her to eat, because she was the one who took her mom to mass. And then she would wait till she got home and slice up this little piece of toffee into 6 pieces so that she could share it with her siblings. And I asked her, why would you do that? I was like, why would you cut up this little piece? And she said, no, it tastes better when you share. And that was just who she was. And I learned so much from her. It tastes better when you share.
Writing that down.
Somebody has that mindset, that generosity of spirit. If she hadn't had it, I probably wouldn't have been in South Africa. And then when I wouldn't have gone to South Africa. Then when I got to South Africa, you know, I was so blessed to have encountered somebody as brilliant and magnanimous as Strive Masiwa, who is a titan on the continent. And if you don't know him, you should look him up. He's incredible. One of the richest men on the continent, a massive philanthropist. And he you know, as a woman on the continent, but anywhere really inhabiting corporate spaces, you often find yourself having to navigate uncomfortable scenarios, often involving people of the opposite gender, with often a stark asymmetry of power. But with him, he was such a principled man. He has 5 children, 4 girls. So he's a girl dad at his heart. He's like an absolute feminist. And so to have somebody like that, who is so principled, so brilliant, so generous, to be a sponsor, it was huge for me. It meant that when I was very young in my career, I was absolutely given opportunities to learn and make mistakes and just be thrown into situations that somebody my age and so young in my career would never have had the opportunity to. And I realized that I very much identify as a feminist, which is kind of a swear word in Nigeria, I've learned. But it's really important for women to uplift other women, but it's almost more important to have men in positions of power who are conscious of the need to be intentional about empowering women and young girls. And he was that person for me. And so I had this incredible learning experience over the course of almost 7 years at the Econet Group. In that time, I grew so much professionally, technically, in terms of the experiences that I had. Also, even in terms of my character, because moving to, the opposite end of the world, not knowing anybody, will do something to you. It also forces you to be intentional about creating community and building family in a new place, which was something that made my time in South Africa incredible. But I just, having that kind of person as a sponsor was absolutely critical to not only finding myself in fintech, but also being able to develop the skill sets and have the experiences that I was able to have, was absolutely because I had him as a sponsor. And then again, just like randomly, so like I think there's a 3. This the first one is Clem and the role that she played. Then having Strive as a sponsor and the path that he set me on, and he would tell me, mobile money is the future. It's the future, and this is where you need to focus on. And he was right. Fintech was the future at the time, right? So like having him as a sponsor was incredible. And then I think the third big, Kairos moment was meeting my co-founder. And I think some people are born entrepreneurs, like they're like made of that metal. I don't think I'm a born entrepreneur. I don't think I'm a born entrepreneur. So I'm almost like, it was another opportunity that was handed to me, and then somebody begged me to take it, and I did, and I'm so grateful that I did. As much as it is so hard, this startup and entrepreneurial journey is probably the hardest thing I've ever done. Everybody says it's hard. I understand that it's supposed to be hard. Sometimes I wonder if it would be easier if I was like, if I was what I consider to be a born entrepreneur. But it's very hard, but I'm still so grateful.
Thanks for sharing that. I like where you ended up, because that segues into the next set of questions I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
I'm sure as you were living your baby girl life, you experienced some challenges along the way. So could you share some challenges that have, been significant in your journey, and how did you go about addressing them?
There are challenges like that are very, very, very much at the fore of my mind. But I also, they're just so sensitive and involve people that are still very much real people in my life.
Could I give a bit of context?
Please do.
Okay.
Please.
So the African Maverick platform, what the intent is to promote independent thinking and purposeful living amongst young Africans.
Yes.
That's what we are working towards.
Okay.
So the whole premise is about like developing independent thinking Africans, right? So in line with that, what are challenges that you've experienced that, would I say, developed that training you to think independently for yourself?
Okay, there are a couple of things. I will say two things that are very much not related. So the first one, I talked earlier about how I was always making all these random decisions, but being this like quote unquote high achieving like young person, there is often with those kinds of people, there's a deep seated desire for some external validation very often that comes with it. When you see people who are like always trying to like apply to like Ivy League and like there's often that. And so when I decided to move to South Africa, it was initially hard because I had friends who were working at Google and Goldman and McKinsey and then I was like working at this incredible organization, African organization that like was having huge impact on the continent, but like at least nobody in the world that I had previously inhabited had heard of it, right? It wasn't a brand that many people were familiar with. And so that part of me that tended to seek that kind of external validation, just like struggled with it. And then also when you come out of, especially in the US, right? So I think most universities in the US you're like graded on a curve. So there's always basically a socialization for comparison. And in fact, throughout your entire education, formal education from primary school to all the way through to university, everyone is on the same track, almost running a race on almost the same track. And then as soon as you graduate, life just kind of goes like this for everyone. And I think initially I really struggled with that. I struggled with validating myself and feeling good about the decisions I was making for myself because I was learning, because the work I was doing was important, because I felt that I was having significant impact, because I was having an experience on the continent as a young African that I'd always desired to have, that I was traveling extensively and learning about it was a fantastic, I couldn't have had such an edifying experience anywhere else. It was the best decision I could have made for myself. And I just needed to, initially, I struggled with just like validating myself that this was the right thing for me. So that was an initial challenge. I think a lot of young people will feel that. And then the other challenge that I had when I first moved to South Africa was I was a massive, massive extrovert. And then I moved to this country where I didn't know anyone. And I remember I moved there full time in October 2012, and I didn't make any friends until March 2013. And it was such a difficult time. But it was very difficult. But it was also an incredible growth opportunity because it meant that I had to learn myself. I had to like myself. I had to spend time with myself and be intentional about taking care of myself as somebody who is like very much an extrovert, but is not having those opportunities or many of them to recharge. I had to learn how to recharge my own batteries as an extrovert. And then that was an incredible opportunity, because life happens and there are many things that will happen. Like now I'm in a season of life where I'm not able to be as extroverted as I had been in the past, because I'm just working so much. And I think that season of my life really prepared me for where I am now, where I'm okay with myself. I'm good with myself. But then as I came out of that experience in March 2013, I met people. And then I had this opportunity to build a community and build a family with warmth and intentionality. And I always wanted to feel stretched and intellectually stimulated in community, in a safe space. And I think because I had this season of aloneness, in a way that I don't think everybody who I kind of weaved into this community fully understood. I was just very intentional about making people feel welcome and creating a space for people to feel seen and received and included. And I hope and I think that lots of people in my community feel the same way, because we had an experience for the almost 6 years that I was in Johannesburg. I just had an incredible time and met the most fantastic humans and made the best friends. And it was almost like an extension of university, because we just were having the time of our lives in a very wholesome way. But it was incredible.
Just listening to you share that, I get the vibe that you are a very intentional person, or you've learned to be intentional, right? And from my understanding, with intention comes purpose, right? They go hand in hand, right? So what would you say, how would you define purposeful living?
Purposeful living.
Yeah, from an African context.
This is really I'm very much still trying to understand. I'm not purposeful living. Generally, I would say is not going with the flow, being thoughtful about how and why one expends their energy, because we can find ourselves toiling and toiling and toiling, and at the end of the day, you ask yourself, why did I spend my energy and my youth and my gifts? Why did I expend them in this way? That said, I have been thinking a lot about purpose. What is one's purpose? Somebody told me that you don't have to have a singular purpose. And I think, I don't know. What do you think about that?
About not having a singular purpose?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I agree with that. And the reason, first of all, let me give a disclaimer. I am no expert on purpose.
Okay.
And that's the reason why African Mavericks exists, is to have conversations where we can, as a collective, figure out what that means from an African context, right? So to answer that question, though, I would say I agree with that, because I feel purpose, for one, there's this whole narrative about finding your purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
From my experience, I don't think purpose is something you find. I think purpose is something that comes out of who you are as a person, right? And you have to, in that means it's dependent on the moment,
Mm.
if that makes any sense.
Mm.
So it's something you create out of who you are as a person. So in whatever environment you are in, what's your purpose in that environment? How can you if I'll take the note and the smile as you agree with me.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting because I agree with you, right? There's context, like context always matters. And so yeah, I kind of I kind of agree that there needn't be a singular purpose. At the same time, increasingly I've been thinking, in as much as I'm a massive extrovert normally, I was mentioning earlier to you that I'm a shy founder. I'm not. I've been advised by some of my my ones in the startup space that I need to be, you know, more out there, more intentional about PR, and it just doesn't come very naturally to me. And then I wondered, but this is actually one of my colleagues, actually, one of my Gen Z colleagues who I love. He's our head of marketing and brand, and he said to me, you know, you're doing Aku, that's our startup. You're doing Aku a disservice by not being out there, by not building a personal brand for yourself, because it's important for startups. And so I'm starting to recognize that as a responsibility. But then I started to ask myself, okay, being that this is not something that I necessarily desire, but my context has found me here. And my context means that as a startup founder means that I may have to build a personal brand and may have to build a public platform that I'm like not super excited about. But what will I do with such a platform? Because like it has to, like you said, there needs to be some intent. Like there has to be a purpose. Like what would you do with such a platform? And there are lots of things that I would want to do. I would like to inspire women, especially young women, especially young African women. But also I'm a spiritual person, and I was talking to a friend about this yesterday, and I said, I don't necessarily want a platform or I don't necessarily want all of that. But if God gives it to me, then I would like to use it to glorify him. And I would like to use it to tell people about him. And that was just a conversation that I had yesterday. So it's still kind of like a little bit of an immature thought. I don't know what that looks like necessarily, but thinking about purpose in this context, maybe there's something that I need to double click on there.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I agree with you, and I would chat. I mean, I agree with your Gen Z colleague that says you need to. And since you're spiritual, and you brought up the context of the Bible, which is something I believe in as well. And I have my own independent, thinking towards that, but that's conversation for another day.
Yeah, definitely.
The reason why I'm bringing it up though is one of the stories in the Bible that kept on coming up to me in this season of my life that gave me the courage to start reaching out for this context, this African Mavericks context, is the story about the master and that had 3 servants. Jesus told that story, I think 2 times in the Bible, right? And you obviously know the story. He gave one 5 talents, he gave the other one 2, he gave the last one 1. The 5 used the 5 to get 5 more. 2 used 2 to get 2 more. The 1 went buried it down, like giving excuses. So when the master came back, he rewarded the one that used 5 to get 5 more, rewarded the 2 that used 2 to get 2 more, and punished the one that had 1 and took that 1 and gave it to the other, right? And just thinking about that story, right? For me, the understanding I have on that is the talents we're given are the gifts we have, right? The gifts, the provision, the abundance, whatever it is the knowledge that we've gained over time, all that are
Mm.
talents, right? And it's up to us. It's not up to the master to tell us what to do with that.
Yeah.
It's up to us to use that to make five more and in doing that, that will glorify the master's name, right? That's my understanding of that.
That's
So
good.
the reason why I shared that is I would kind of tie it back to one of the challenges you had earlier of validating yourself. If you go on my profile, you see that my LinkedIn profile, you see that African Mavericks started in 2015.
I saw.
Yeah, that's I put it there intentionally because that was when the idea I got the download. If I may, that's when I got the download. But in looking around and comparing myself to the people around me, I didn't feel like I was equipped to tell that story. I didn't, so I hid behind. I've been running an Instagram page, just sharing because I'm a recovering self-help addict.
What addict?
Recovering self-help addict.
Interesting.
Yeah, I used to read a lot of self-help books, a lot.
And why did you stop?
They're saying the same thing. You're all saying the same thing, and I just wanted to expand my knowledge base. I still read a lot of nonfiction, but not particularly self-help. So in doing that, what I hid behind in running the Instagram page was just sharing quotes that I came across, sharing information about what I think. Sorry?
So active, the Instagram page.
Yes.
Is it African Mavericks?
Yeah, it is African Mavericks.
Okay.
I'm a bit shy about that. But we're here now. So it just over time, I just recently started showing my face on there. Recently started, re-strategizing because I felt like I wasn't using enough of the gifts that I was given. So I'm saying that to challenge you because it seems you were saying you used may and you emphasized maybe I'm supposed to do this, maybe I'm supposed to do that. This is just me challenging you to, maybe do something about it.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
I just don't know how much of the society in which we live today is rewarding ego, and if that's like the best thing, right? I guess it's great when you're starting something new, and there's always that issue of how do you build trust? How do you connect with a new brand? And it's easy to connect with a human being. It's easy to connect with a founder who is relatable. I get it. But I also see the risk of there's a risk. There's a little bit of a risk. But you're right. You're actually right. I'm making excuses and I should stop.
Another thing I'll say to that, since I'm realizing how passionate about this is, like I said, my views on spirituality, I believe in Jesus, right? And I believe in the message he came to share. And in saying that, one of the things I understand is that Jesus Christ had a very, very risky message to share. He had a very unpopular, thank you. He had a very unpopular message to share.
Yes.
And his number one opponents were actually religious leaders.
Yes.
The Pharisees and scribes and Sadducees. And he didn't make that stop him. He shared the message regardless of what the lay of the land was or how people thought.
Wow, you're really getting somewhere. He did do that. And he even did it at the risk of sounding arrogant, at the risk of sounding egotistical. He said, I am the truth. I am the Son of Man. I am like he did all these things, and I'm sure at the time people thought he was crazy and egotistical and all these things. It's an interesting point. I'm sorry. Please land though. Land.
You landed for me. But it's basically having that he understood his identity. And
Mm,
one of the things I'm understanding is it's more of a practical when you start reading the Bible
mm,
without the undertones of religion or heaven or hell and
yes.
all that, you start seeing the practical, you know, you start seeing it from a practical standpoint.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is for Jesus Christ to get to that point where he had confidence in his identity, he had to go through a process. Remember,
yeah.
the Bible tells us, it's recorded in the Bible, that at 12 years old, he had that premonition of who he was.
Mm-hmm.
But he wasn't ready to, he wasn't equipped from a
Mm,
character standpoint to share that
mm,
message.
yes.
So he had to go through 18 years of self-development,
Mm-hmm.
even to the point where when it was time for him to start, if the Bible records that the first um,
Miracle.
miracle he performed, he
But
was
I'm not.
like, I'm not ready for this.
Yeah.
Meaning to say he still felt like he needed to do more work on himself. But
Mm,
he the what I say events called for him to act when he wasn't ready. The
mm.
events when he didn't feel like he was ready. And in doing that, you know,
That's a very interesting perspective.
he thank you. um yeah, I get very passionate when it comes to talking about things like that. But let's find our way to get back to you. So you were defining purpose, right? And just from your story earlier, you had mentioned how your parents were very supportive of the decisions you made, right? Um, do you think that played a part in you being the independent thinker that you are? One, two, would you say you are an independent thinker? And three, how would you define independent thinking?
Oh, those are so many questions. You might have to prompt me, but I
Okay.
was absolutely my parents rarely understood the choices I made.
Mm,
They would always say, "We believe in you. We trust you." And it's a very powerful thing for your parents to say, "I trust you." And so even if you don't know what you're doing, if you are like not all the way sure, um, it just gives you a, a level of confidence that you wouldn't ordinarily have. No, my parents, they trust me. These people that I look up to, they trust me. So I'm gonna go ahead because they trust me. Um, so that definitely was was huge for me. Um, then the second question was, am I an independent thinker?
yeah.
Um, I think I think I'm an independent thinker. I'm not a I don't like I'm not the I don't think I'm a quintessential anything. So I like okay, I like went to all these nice schools and things, but I'm not a quintessential like type A person. I'm actually really like type B and very chilled. My co-founder is actually my husband is actually the one who's like super type A, and people who meet us would never think it. So yes, I'm not quintessentially like type A. I'm not. I'm not like I don't fit into what you imagine to be like a, a Christian African woman. I don't think I fit into any of those boxes very clearly. I've absolutely evolved. I've evolved in all of those identities. But like when I was in Joburg, for instance, even before I had any friends, I was a young socialite. I was in all the clubs. I was like, I never stood from the beginning of my time in Joburg to the end, I never stood in any club. I never stood in any line to get into any club because everyone knew me. I remember one time, when I first got there, I would go to the club, and I would go to the club by myself, and I loved to dance. And I didn't even drink alcohol, but I just would go to the club to dance, and I would just be dancing by myself. And I remember like a couple of years later, I became friends with a guy who apparently he lived in London, but then would come to Joburg for work frequently. He was an investment banker, and I remember I met him at a professional networking event, and he said to me, "Oh my goodness, what are you doing here?" I said, "Oh, I'm one of the organizers of the event." And he said, "Are you serious?" He said, "I thought you were a go-go dancer." I said, "What?" He said, I used to see you in the club, and you're just such an incredible dancer. You just used to dance." And I was like, go. That's a fantastic. But so you can imagine, right? And he wouldn't imagine that I'm also like, I used to do Bible study every Thursday with my girlfriends. I'm in church. Like, it's just, I'm not quintessentially anything. And I think that speaks to being an independent and critical thinker, making choices for myself about what I think is important, what are my values, what does aligning with my values mean, what does authenticity mean, what do these identities mean for me as a Christian, as a feminist, as a business person? Is it like, how do I live those real experiences? And I think that I I'm able to live and have lived as authentically, because of course I'm very different than I was when I was in the club every weekend. I'm not that person anymore. But I think that I was able to be that person and still be the person that I am, and not necessarily fit comfortably into any box, because I am able to think independently. So that was the second question. And then the third question was, what do I understand to be an independent thinker? I think an independent thinker, I think first, to be an independent thinker, at the root, you first have to be curious. You first have to be curious, because when you are curious, you start to ask questions, right? You have to ask questions of yourself, of society, of the status quo. You have to ask questions. And from those questions, you can start to reckon and form your own opinions. If you don't ask questions, it's almost impossible to be an independent thinker. So I think at the core is a genuine curiosity about things, about why things are the way they are, why society is structured the way it is, why, for me as a Christian, why is the church the way it is? What is the history of Christianity, and what does that mean for me as an African colonial influence? But like, you have to ask questions. And I think that in being an independent thinker is about having the courage to ask those questions and answer them honestly, I guess.
I love that answer. I love that answer a lot. Something you while you were answering the questions, you had touched on the next question I had in mind.
Oh wow!
Yeah, the next question. I actually have a list of questions I'm looking at.
Oh wow! Okay.
But I'm trying to pick them based on how the conversation is going.
Okay.
Yeah. So how has you had mentioned how you used to be a socialite, love dancing. By the way, I love dancing too. I'm the person that's just dancing by himself in the club. I'm not caring what anybody thinks. Yeah, that's like the best times I've had when I go out to the club. And it's when you're not even on any, you're not under the influence of anything. You're just like, man,
Just vibe.
F it. I'm gonna enjoy myself here. Well, yeah. So that one resonated with me. Um, so thinking back to that young Dezzy and the Dezzy you are now, how would you say your perspective has significantly changed over time?
My perspective. There's so many ways in which my perspective has changed. Or just like the way I approach life. I think that when I was younger, I was a lot more, and it didn't sound like it. It sounds like I was like a risk taker, but I think I was a lot more fearful. I was a lot more fearful. I was taking risks, but they were kind of controlled. I always knew that, okay, my parents are there for me. If this doesn't, I like going to South Africa felt like a big risk, but it wasn't. I always knew that if it didn't work out, my parents, I'll go home to my parents' house and I'll figure it out. And now I am doing life. I'm blessed to do life with an incredible partner who inspires me and challenges me and demands things of me that I don't know, that I didn't know I had in me. That's great. But I find that the safety net or the controlled kind of risks that I used to, like, it was almost like I used to like go skydiving, but I always knew I had a parachute, right? Yeah. And then now I'm doing this startup thing and there's literally no parachute. We're just like, we're just this is free fall right now. And I just like approach things with a lot more centeredness and a lot more courage. And that is something that has definitely come from the influence of my husband. But also I used to think that I knew God, but I didn't like have any like significant challenges in my life, right? That's the truth. I didn't have any. I had like a very like straightforward life. Everything was like lovely. I had my parents, they loved me, my siblings, they loved me, my friends, school, everything was fine. But when you do startup, it's really hard. It's hard. It's hard to build. It's hard to be responsible for people. It's hard to bring people in and have them buy into a vision and then take responsibility and care for them, and know that you are holding livelihoods in your hand. That's a lot. It's also like very hard on mental health. And in the challenge of entrepreneurship, I now really have an experiential knowledge of God and who God is and how he works and his principles and what faith means to God and how faith works when you don't know how things are going to go, but you're like, well, God said he's got me, so I'm going to take this next step, even though I don't know if there's flat ground here. I don't know I'm just going to take the step. And every time you take the step into the darkness, he's with you and he brings light and he brings provision and he brings strength and he just like everything and partnerships and people and support and funding because I'm a startup founder and I'm always fundraising. But like, yeah, like, so like I now have a lot more courage, and that courage is from a place of understanding that my strength and my source and my ability and my competence, all of those things are infinite because they're actually not from me, they're from God. So it's just like, I'm like, okay, I can keep going because God is just, he's endless, infinite, like abundance. Like he is just going to keep working. The scripture that I meditate on is, or like I try to be conscious of, is that the power that raised Christ from the dead is at work in me. Like, wow. And so like, always try and think about that. And then I don't know if this is a perspective change or just like I'm now in a season of life where, like I mentioned earlier, I used to be a massive extrovert. A startup is really hard and it's just like all consuming. And so we work a lot. We're always working. And it's very difficult to have balance. And so I don't socialize as much as I have done in the past. And part of that is just because I don't have time, but also a part of it is because I think, if I'm honest, I developed a kind of social anxiety after entering startup world fully. And so just trying to figure that out. But I'm also just in a place where community is just not, I'm grateful for my friends and my family and the people who pour into me. But there are many, many weeks where I don't do anything social besides hanging out with my husband. And that's okay. So it's a new season, basically. It's a new season.
Thank you for that answer. And being a little bit vulnerable. And if you allow me, I would like you to dig deeper into that. You had mentioned how this you were vulnerable. I'm just teasing because I want you to go deeper. This social anxiety that you are aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Did you say it has any relations to? And forgive me if I'm being too personal here, or I'm acting like a therapist, which I'm not. But would you say it has any relation to the young Dezzy that was comparing herself with?
You got it. You got it. So good. That's a fantastic. You made the connection. Absolutely. I graduated from business school, and everybody else, went and got, 6-figure jobs and brand name multinationals, and then I graduated and moved back to the continent to build a startup that nobody had ever heard of. And I get that at the time, startup was a little bit sexy, but it wasn't really not necessarily in my world. So I remember I would go out places, and the first thing people ask you is, what do you do when they meet you? And I used to dread that question. And I was like, yeah, I work for a startup. Oh, what's it called? As a fintech. What's the name? You wouldn't have heard of it. And that just I just hated it. Generally speaking, I was the kind of person who when I meet a person, what do you do is not the first or second or third thing that I'm inclined to ask or to talk about. But being in this phase of working in a startup that is still unknown at the time, completely unknown. And then still being very much in the, when you start to build something, you always have to start with the foundation. So you now dig and you go underground and you're digging underground. And when you're digging underground in the dirt, people don't understand, why is she messing around in the dirt under the ground? I remember I had relatives who would be like, I I know that you just got married, but you can't go to business school and then just come back and be a housewife. Like people thought I was just being a housewife. Or like people like I had like relatives who would like come and say, I can help you get a job. Like, people just thought I was messing around. And that was just the phase I was in. And it just made me very anxious to the point that I didn't like to go places where I knew I would meet new people and they would ask, what do you do? I think that was kind of like the genesis of it. Eventually, it just kind of like, over time, like we talked about earlier, when you are starting, people don't value the start of a thing. I think there's also a scripture that says the end of a thing is I think more blessed or greater than the start of a thing. So in the beginning, nobody values your efforts. When people now start to see the fruit of your efforts, people start to, affirm you, and like now we have a license, we have a product that people use, and people are hearing about us, and my family members realize I'm not a housewife, and like that that makes it better, but also it's just this thing is just so hard that sometimes I just don't want. And I remember speaking to an investor friend, and he like asked me, how are you? And then I immediately started talking about Aku and how we're doing and our milestones and how we're growing. And he said, oh, that's great. He asked me a couple of questions about it, and he was like, that's really, I'm really happy for you. But he said, but also, no, I just wanted to know how you are. And I literally wept, because nobody asks you, no investor asks you, how are you? No, they just want to make sure that you haven't died yet, that you're not about to, you're not about to collapse in this, startup winter, in this VC winter. They're like, and so I just was not used to people asking me how I was, because people often don't. The first thing that people think of when they see you as a founder is like business house. And then as a founder also, you very easily, almost like your identity morphs into your company, and it's very difficult to separate. If your company is flailing, then you feel like you're flailing. If you're succeeding, I guess you feel like a success. But like most of the time, as a founder, you're just kind of like figuring it out, like just like a mess generally. And so if startups are generally a mess, and founders are generally a mess, and that just made it really hard to be as social as I used to be, because it's just hard. It's just hard. So you're absolutely right. It's very much to do with that validation, but I'm working on it.
I feel like I should ask you, how are you now?
I am doing very well. I'm well.
That's good to hear. I was going to ask, since we've actually danced around the topic, I would like you to talk more about Aku and the lessons maybe or first of all, what led you into solving that particular problem? Because before I go further, I just want to say, bless their heart for whoever came up with the copy, building wealth at the base of the pyramid. I love that. When I read it, I was like, okay, I completely understand who they are trying to serve. I completely understand who they're trying to serve. But that said, speak more about Aku. What led you guys to solve the problem at that level, and lessons, any valuable lessons you've learned?
Awesome. So I can't take full credit for building wealth at the base of the pyramid. When I was in business school, I took a class called Bebop. It was Bebop stands for business. Bebop, business at the base of the pyramid. It was called Bebop, but it was business at the base of the pyramid. Yeah, that's what it was. That was the class, and the professor was a gentleman called Michael Chu, and we, in our first class, he talked about, he had us read a paper that defined the base of the pyramid. And people, when you say the base of the pyramid, people think, especially when you are talking about emerging markets, people think you're talking about like the most indigent, like, like people who are just like starving, dying. But actually, in a continent like ours, the middle class is very small. The upper class is tiny. And actually, almost 90% of the population is the base, right? And so that was how we defined the base of the pyramid. It is the mass market in most emerging economies, especially in Africa. And so that was really like the foundation of that. But I had already been in the space before before agreeing to start Aku. And so I had already seen what fintech, before it was called fintech, what it could do, how technology could be applied to include and empower and change lives for people at the base of the pyramid. So that was the work that we did with EcoCash in Zimbabwe, in Burundi, in Lesotho. That was the work that I observed with companies like M-Pesa in Kenya. Airtel money was taking off at that time in other parts of the continent. And so I was very much in that space. My co-founder was the one that had, I call him my husband, my co-founder, was the one that had this frustration about why it wasn't having the same impact in Nigeria as it was having in other parts of the continent. And then our third co-founder, Umobasi Duke, he had been in fintech in the Nigerian context specifically, and had so much frustration about trying to build something in this context, and just like reckoning with so many challenges, so many things, structural and otherwise, that made it really, really hard. And so when we came together, we just like, it was a perfect combination. You had somebody who was just like not an industry person, who just didn't understand why it couldn't work, and just like adamant that this kind of massive impact that mobile money is having in other parts of Africa can happen and should happen in Nigeria. So that was one. That was Patrick, my husband. And then we had Umar, who's like, it doesn't work here because this place is different like this. It's different in 1, 2, 3 ways. And then we had myself, who had seen mobile money and fintech work incredibly well in other African markets. And, in Zimbabwe, as an example, it may be higher now, but at the time, EcoCash, which is Econet's mobile money product, was moving over 60% of Zimbabwe's GDP. It was more trusted than all the banks, and like it was having massive impact on the lives of people. People are now having access to payments, much easier access to cross-border payments, to international remittances inbound that were helping them improve lives. They had access to savings products, interest-bearing savings products, and credit products. People that would previously have been excluded from like microloans that can be life-changing in terms of building wealth, growing businesses, now had access to all these things because of tech. I'd seen it work really well. And so together we just had this like incredible combination of skills and perspectives that made us, I think, ask the right questions. And one of the things that we learned in the process of asking the right questions, we did a couple of projects before we got our license. And one of the projects that we did was a massive disbursement project in partnership with government. So we were one of 2 wallet platforms that were used to disperse funds across the country to informal micro merchants. And in the process of doing those disbursements, a massive, overwhelming majority of users that we had dispersed funds to in a USSD-based wallet were unable to independently access the wallet because literacy was a barrier. And so then now we start to look at the markets in Africa where mobile money has been super successful, markets like Zimbabwe, Kenya, Tanzania, even a country like neighboring Ghana. All of those countries have literacy rates of over 80%. And then you reckon with Nigeria and you see that Nigeria's official literacy rate is, we claim around 60%, but in reality, it's much lower. And so we realized that these people they could not access the tech, even though we felt that USSD was the gold standard of accessibility, because we know that smartphone penetration is still very low. It's around 50%. These people, many of them don't have access to smartphones. And so we felt that we were being incredibly inclusive with USSD, but understood very quickly its limitations in the context where people struggle with literacy. And that for us was really the springboard in terms of thinking about how can we drive or spearhead the kind of revolution that we've seen with mobile money in other African countries, whilst creating experiences that are accessible for users for whom literacy poses a challenge. And in the context of, maybe not having access to a high-end smartphone, understanding the constraints of our market, how do we do that? And that's really what we set out to do. So we have we built a product that was designed for that. And we launched we launched like a beta, no marketing, just like quietly launched. We built out our proprietary core banking platform all in-house. Shout out to Umar and Benin, our CTO and director of engineering. They did an incredible job. And we built a product with various constraints in mind. So device constraints, literacy constraints, price sensitivity for people at the base of the pyramid, all of these things in mind. And in doing that, we could not take shortcuts. And so where other fintechs may have, just leveraged a banking partner, we realized that the economics of leveraging a banking partner for license cover would make the price, the cost to serve too high, and we would have to price higher, and that wouldn't serve the people that we're looking to serve. So we had to go and apply for our own license. And then, many neobanks will use a third-party core banking platform. Most commercial banks do also. But we knew that just like mobile money, the reason why mobile money was so effective is because it's a much more efficient tech. You're not paying for a license or an account on a legacy core banking platform like T24. It completely affects the economics of serving. And so we built our own core banking platform. All of these things took an incredible amount of time and effort, and were difficult. But we did them, and we're doing it. And we had, like I mentioned earlier, we just had our full-scale commercial launch in the Southeast. So we're not focused on the big cities, Lagos, Abuja. We're focused mostly on tier 2 cities and rural areas. So we launched in Enugu, and it's going incredibly, incredibly well.
Congratulations to hear that. Congratulations on the Aqua team. It's interesting and commendable to hear that you guys are going through the pains of actually building out the platform from the ground up, so that you could actually serve the people you want to serve.
Exactly.
Not taking shortcuts and all that. So again, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you so much.
excuse my ignorance by asking this, but is Aqua a platform I can use to send money from here to my people back home?
Unfortunately, not yet.
Okay.
We we have Pan-African aspirations that extend to the diaspora. So hopefully one
Okay.
day it will be. But at the moment, no, it's not.
Now let's go into back to your story, right? What lessons would you want to pass on to maybe a younger you, or someone that would be inspired by your story? What lessons would you want to pass on to them? I know there's a lot, so maybe you can narrow it
No,
down to one or two.
I have one, but it's going to sound like I'm again justifying my poor behavior. But I believe it, so I'm going to share it. Um, one piece of advice that I really believe in is, and anyone that asks me, I say, we're in a generation where everybody's trying to build a brand. Everybody's brand building, platform building, and that's great and important. Like I said, I'm gonna do better and try harder. I am. But I
I'll hold
also
you to it.
please do. But I also think that brand building is fundamentally about more than social media following and notoriety. I think that brand building is about integrity and a promise to deliver on something, and following through on that promise. And when people ask about you, so for me, the epitome of brand is when somebody asks about Ebuka, the feedback that I get from person A is positive. And then the feedback that I get from person B is also positive. But more importantly, it's consistent, right? It's consistent and positive because you have made a promise and you followed through on that promise, and it's validated independently by different people. I think that's very important. And at the heart of that is integrity. And when young people are thinking about brand building, they can do all the other stuff, the bells and the whistles, and like it's great, and the PR, all of that stuff is good. But if you miss this part, then it's almost like you're building a house of cards that will at some point collapse. This part is very important. And I think it's so undervalued. And for me, as a founder that doesn't do PR, I think the one thing that I have benefited from is people asking people who know me about me, and there being consistency in the feedback received. I think that has helped me immensely. It's helped me immensely when you're like trying to navigate situations where there's like low trust, people, especially like during COVID, or like when you're fundraising, people don't know you, they need to be able to trust you to give you money. And just generally in terms of like building a network that is valuable, like that element of integrity and like honoring a brand promise is so incredibly valuable. And I think that's the one advice that I would give a young person. Don't underestimate the importance of that.
I love that. I love that a lot. I love that a lot. And just personally speaking, integrity is one of my values that I do my utmost best to live by. Even I'll be vulnerable and I say, even when it comes to the women I'm dating, I try to be, this is what it is, this is not what it is, so that I can keep myself accountable. So yeah, I agree with you 100% on integrity and building a brand based off of that. Thank you for sharing. I'll ask this last question before we go into this has been a beautiful conversation so far. Thank you for the time. Um, so the African Mavericks slogan is "Bet on your truth."
Mm, mm, that's good. I like
Thank
that.
you, thank you. So I like that I hit deep with you. But what do you when you hear that? What does it mean to you?
I think what it means to me is probably just like the headspace that I'm currently in. What it means to me is focusing on and leveraging my strengths and being less concerned about my weaknesses and my limitations. I say that because, like I mentioned, I'm not super type A. I'm like not, it's probably, people are not gonna, I'm not like particularly academic. I'm like very intellectually curious, but like, I like, my friends in college know, like I was like the bare minimum kind of person.
This is what I have to do to pass. Only read these three
Yeah,
chapters. Okay,
like
all
no,
right,
like
I'm good.
how can I just get like, like an A? If I can get an A minus, that would be great. and and but like I'm not like I like those like being super academic just never excited me. Like I mentioned, when I was in college, I learned way more. We had this dining hall called Commons on campus that was this massive dining hall, and sometimes I would not always go to class and I would just sit in Commons, and different people would come and go like in between classes. And I would have these incredibly rich conversations with people and connect deeply with people and learn so much from them. I learned so much from these interactions. And I realized that um, technically as a product person, like I have a background in product development. Now as a founder and as a CEO, one of my strengths is empathy. And empathy means being able to put myself in the position of my customers and prospective customers. What are their pain points? And what does it look like to be able to serve them very well? That requires empathy. Right now, I have all these constraints and I have all these things on my mind as a founder. Like we're in this bear market, everything is hard, but I also have this team that I need to build, and I need to be concerned about welfare and the morale of my colleagues. How do I do that given all the constraints that I have? That requires empathy. There's so many technical things. There's so much that empathy is at the heart of, and that's really, I guess, an area of strength for me. And just because I'm not, I hated finance in business school, or like accounting or whatever. Like just because I'm not like good at those things, like there are things that I'm good at, and those things are also really important and very, very impactful. So when I think about betting on my truth, I'm betting on who I am, leaning into my strengths, and like not being intimidated or discouraged by the areas in which I'm like not super strong. That's the first thing that came to my mind. But my question is like, what does it mean for you? Because it's a very powerful, it's a very powerful mantra.
Um, I love your answer, by the way, and I just from the conversation and how it started, I I agree with you that you're an empathetic person.
Really?
Yeah, the way the conversation started is you had mentioned how you had gone to the African Mavericks page and you appreciated the fact that I was just starting out, and you shared the Bible verse that connects with me as well. So I was like, she understands where I'm coming from.
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah, so off the rip, I got the empathetic vibe from you, and keep on with that. And
Thank
to answer your question, how I see betting on your truth is it's sort of aligned with what you're saying. Just taking the discovering who you are and going all in on who that person is. That's how I'll put it in simple and short answer. Taking the time to discover who you are. And when you figured out or have an inkling on who that person is, going all in on that.
Mm, mm.
That's
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
That's how I had to explain it to my younger sister because she was asking me, "What does bet on your truth mean?" I don't really understand. I was like, "Hey."
Did you get it? Did she get it in the end?
Yeah, when I sent the voice note, she was like, "I love it," and ever since then, that's the answer I stuck with because I used to give like this long-winded intellectual answer. I don't even remember how I used to answer it, but after that conversation with her, I was like, "Okay, this is how I'm
Clarity.
gonna go." Clarity, yeah. All right. So unconventional questions. If you could describe your life journey in one song or a fruit, what would they be and why?
One song or a fruit?
Yeah.
There's a song immediately came to mind, and it's
Okay.
not. It doesn't necessarily describe my life's journey right now, but it describes the aspiration for my life, and it's a song by Beyonce called "Here" or "I Was Here," and basically she says, um, at the end of the day, she can have all this, she can be all this, she have all this fame and all this, acclaim, but she just wants, even if it's just one person, to know and appreciate that she was here. Just because she was here, their life was better. So that's the song that I would like at the end of my life. I like just one person just be really, really grateful that I was here. So yeah, that's a song for me.
I love that. Are you part of the Beehive?
I'm like a super fan. You can't tell me anything about Beyonce. I'm not interested.
I've known to keep my comments to myself when it comes to that. Okay, so imagine your life was a book. What would you call this current chapter? Or what title would you give this current chapter?
This current chapter. I would like to be a little bit more artsy, but like only one word is coming to mind,
Okay.
and the word is struggle.
Okay. Okay.
But no. Actually, let me try and couch it in more positive terms. I'd probably say stretching.
Stretching. Okay.
Stretch. Yes.
Okay. That's a very nice positive twist to that. Okay. This is kind of it's kind of a weird question, but if you could witness any event of the past, present, or future, what event would you want to witness?
Oh. I had one really, like top of mind answer, but now I don't know if I want to say it. I'm just gonna say it. I would really like in the very imminent future to witness a ceasefire in Gaza. That's something that I would really like to see soon.
Okay.
Like
Was that it?
minds. It's political, yeah, but it's like you said. I guess because you said future last, it was just like,
Yeah. That's. I wasn't expecting that, but I like it anyways. How would you describe the color of your journey so far?
purple.
Purple. Okay.
Yes.
Now, how would you describe that to someone that can't see?
Ooh. Okay. I would describe it as rich and vibrant and um, 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 like luminous. There's a particular purple that I have in mind.
Okay.
Luminous, like just um, rich, vibrant, luminous. Like it has a certain kind of almost a light to it, and and enjoyable.
All right. Now I'm even more, because purple is actually my favorite color. And
Really?
it
What?
became my favorite color when I realized it signifies royalty. And I was
Yes.
like, yeah,
Yes.
that's my color.
I was gonna say something about royalty, but I felt that I've said a lot about church. I should probably give everyone a break.
No holds barred here. Like, give it your, be open, be open. Um. Okay, so if life is a journey, this last of the unconventional questions, if I
Mhm.
may. If life is a journey, what vehicle are you traveling in? And what does that say about your approach to life?
What vehicle am I traveling in? Hmm. Am I traveling in? Not do I want to travel in, but am I traveling in? That's interesting. Um, am I traveling in? I think I'm traveling in like a a I think I'm traveling in a steam engine train. And it's like making steady progress. And it may not be the fastest, but it's making steady progress, and it's consistent, and it's going, and it's like reliably advancing. Not super fast. And then I think the most important thing about the train is that there are lots of people in the train.
Mm.
There's a lot of opportunity to meet and connect and learn from people and teach and influence and be influenced by people on the train, because there's just so many people. You can go from one carriage to the next and just keep learning and keep engaging. And I think, yes, that's what I'm on.
Lovely answer. And I think there's something about your just listening to you, I think there's something about your what's the word I'm looking for? Extrovertedness that's yearning to come back. It's like I want people.
Definitely. Absolutely. Want there to be lots of people.
I love that. I love that. So now, question from the previous guest.
Okay.
I think you kind of answered it, but let me ask you a question again. She says, "What is that one thing that you went through that if you didn't go through, you wouldn't be the person that you are right now?"
I did answer that one in a way, but I'm sure there's something else. If I didn't go through it, I wouldn't be the person that I am.
I should have
So
asked you. Oh, my bad. I should
I
have
would say,
asked for your question first before I asked so I don't
okay,
like taint.
yeah, I have a question already, and it's like
Okay.
going to be surprising. Um, uh, um, oh, I almost oh yes. So I like I mentioned, like had this like very like straightforward life, um, and I was fortunate or unfortunate to have very few like, significant disappointments until until I was in my early 20s, which is really unfortunate actually. It's very unfortunate to live a life where you haven't really been materially disappointed until you're 20 something years old. That's not good for character building. But I had this disappointment. If I'd say the disappointment, I think it like undermines it because it just sounds like a little bit stupid, but it was like very significant for me, like hugely significant. And I maybe I'll just say so it's not distracting. So I had applied to business school the first time around, and I didn't get in, and that was like it was a very humbling experience. And then I applied the second time. So I was waitlisted. That's what happened. I was waitlisted, and even after I was waitlisted, I was like still like super confident that no, I'm gonna get it off the waitlist, because things always go well for me. So I'm definitely gonna get it off the waitlist. And the way the waitlist works is that each round they'll drop some people off the waitlist, and then they'll admit some people, and they'll hold some people. So most people get dropped off the wait list. A few people get in. Very few people are retained. And that happened to me 2 rounds. And then literally, like within days of school being supposed to start, I was still on the wait list. And then they called me and they were like, hey, you're already still a candidate. Unfortunately, we don't have enough space. And so we just wanted to call you and let you know that, we're not going to be able to admit you, but we would really love for you to reapply. And that was like, that was the first time that I got to reckon with disappointment and what that means for me and my sense of self and self-esteem. And it sounds it's a really stupid example, but at the time it shook my world. And I had this friend who told me he told me something that blew my mind. He said, like, what the hell is wrong with you? It's like, you're not a serious person. He's like, this is the problem that I have with people like you. People like you claim to believe in yourselves until you face a little bit of rejection or a little bit of disappointment. And he said, that's the difference between people like you and people like me. And so for context, he's an incredibly accomplished, successful person. So he went to medical school in the UK. Halfway through medical school, he did something called an intercalated BSc in neuroscience, graduated with a first class, then went to Cambridge or Oxford, did a PhD in neuroscience, published a chapter in a textbook, Oxford University Press. Then whilst he went back to medical school, when he was in medical school, he was also interning at like Goldman or JP Morgan. And then he was also like a club promoter in nightclubs in the West End in London. And then he also founded and ran a plus-sized modeling agency, like the most bizarre things. And then after he finished medical school, he trained as a doctor and then decided that actually he wanted to go to consulting. And then was at the time was working at McKinsey. And he said to me, that's the difference between people like you and I. You say you believe in yourself until you face a little bit of rejection, a little bit of disappointment, and then it's apparent that you don't believe in yourself. He said, you see, I really believe in myself. He said, the issue is that people look at me and they see this litany of success, right? But they never ask how many times I've been rejected. He was like, the reason I went to XYZ university is because I got rejected from this and this university, like whatever. He said, before I got my job at McKinsey, I applied 3 times. He said, the first time I didn't know what a case interview was. I didn't prep, and I was not able to demonstrate my greatness. He said, the second time I prepared really hard, did all this case interview prep, and the interview went well. Unfortunately for them, they weren't able to perceive my greatness. And then by the third time I had applied, I had gotten offers from every other consulting firm. And I just decided to see whether they would be lucky the third time. Unfortunately for them, I interviewed, I did really well, and I demonstrated my greatness, and they were able to perceive it. And he said, you see, this is the thing. My greatness was never in question. And if you see what he said, the first time he didn't demonstrate his greatness because he didn't prepare. The second time he did, but they didn't perceive it. And the third time he demonstrated and they perceived it, but the greatness was never in question. He says, people face a little bit of rejection and a little bit of disappointment, and then all of a sudden, they don't believe in themselves anymore. He says, rejection can't make you not believe in yourself. You have to believe in yourself. He says, and the reason why you have to believe in yourself is because when you believe in yourself truly and you face disappointment and rejection, it doesn't stop you from trying because you know that you believe in yourself. So you just try more times than most people. And when you try more times than most people, you have more failures than most people, but you also have more successes than most people. And nobody will ever list the failures. And I was like, whoa, that's crazy. That's so good. Like, no, I don't, like, that was just like it blew my mind. And I was like, you're right. Like, you are like arguably the most accomplished person I've ever met. And you had all these failures. You like listed so many failures, so many instances of rejection, but he just keeps on trying more than most people. And so if I hadn't had that experience, I guess what that experience did for me, and also that encounter with this particular friend, it was that it one made me really think about my self-esteem, sense of self-worth, and perception of my greatness, understanding of my greatness. And then really solidify it so that in the face of challenges, rejection, disappointment, it doesn't shake, so that I can like just keep going. And so essentially what I'm saying is that it made me a lot more resilient. And this startup journey requires resilience. You will get nowhere if you are not just like doggedly resilient and persistent. And maybe not the failure as much as the conversation really just like it made me understand that that is something very important. Resilience as a virtue is so important and must be actively cultivated. And yeah, so maybe it's possible that if I hadn't had that experience, then I might not be here or still doing this thing. I might have given up sometime when the VC winter started.
I'm sure Bella would love that answer.
You said?
I said, I'm sure Bella would love that answer. Bella is the name of the guest I had.
Oh, really? Okay.
And this friend of yours, is he African? Maybe.
Yes, he is. He's one of those. He's one of those Nigerians who your parents ask you, do they have two heads? But obviously he doesn't. He just tries more times than most of us.
Yeah.
But yes. Do you want to speak to him?
I would love to. If you,
I will connect you.
Thank you.
I actually forgot it was going to be public. Now he's going to know, and everyone's going to know.
Oh, they don't know about him yet. So you did mention his name.
Okay.
Yeah, unless they go and they know about his journey, then they can connect the dots. But yeah, that was very inspiring. Your friend should be a sales consultant or a sales coach.
It was incredible.
Last question. What question would you have wanted me to ask you that I didn't ask?
Do I have to answer the question, or can I just tell you the question?
No, you don't have to answer the question.
The question that I would have liked you to ask me is, who in the world inspires you the most, or who is your biggest inspiration?
You want to answer off the record?
I mean, I can answer. There's so many answers. I think like they're like seasons and contexts, and but my mom is like a huge inspiration to me because she is so sacrificial in her love and in her career. She, like I mentioned earlier, she was a lawyer, and she like sacrificed so much for us because she wanted to give us a better life and more experiences. And so she just like, when we relocated to the UK, she went to nursing school, and then because in the UK at the time they would pay you to do clinical studies because they didn't have enough nurses. So she would go to school because she was good at school, and also being in school allowed her to be on the same time like schedule as us. She would go to school. She'd be able to pick us up from school when we were on like midterm break. She'd also be on midterm break. So she went to school and did nursing, and then she went to school and did midwifery, and then she went to school and did a master's in public health, and then like she just like so sacrificial. And I often wonder and I don't have an answer, but she made this sacrifice to give us all these opportunities, and it was, at least selfishly, I'm grateful that she made the sacrifices. But then I, as a woman who also aspires to motherhood, now wonders if I, from a place of love, make the same set of sacrifices, does it invalidate her sacrifice? And I don't really know, but I'm very much inspired by her. And then, now in this current season, I'm so very inspired by my husband. When I talked about people who are born entrepreneurs and not, my husband is a born entrepreneur. He just is unshakable in the face of adversity and challenges, and just very calm. And I think he's the one. He will always tell people he's the complete opposite to me. He's very type A, but not academic at all. And he jokes that before he wrote JAM, he said he wrote JAM for many years before he got to university. But super type A, super focused, super exacting when it comes to very detailed. But he's the one that told me that he never ever is concerned about his ability or his competence, or whether or not he's going to succeed, because he has a very strong, sure understanding and conviction that his source and his competence doesn't come from him. It comes from an infinite source, and therefore there's just so much confidence that comes from that. So when I see that play out, I'm just wow, this person is just it's a person who maybe when he was in secondary school would have perhaps been written off because he wasn't the most academic person, has just because of this consciousness gone on to achieve so much. He ended up in the US for undergrad, studied electrical engineering at Prairie View A&M in Houston, and then interned at Apple, and then went to work at Microsoft, and got all these scholarships, and just did all the things that conventional wisdom would say he couldn't have done. But because of this consciousness, this mindset shift, limitless possibilities. And just also challenges me to expand my conception of what is possible. And so every time I think I'm wow, I've got this really ambitious idea, he's just hey, that's cute, 10x. And I'm just it's very, very inspiring. So yeah, those two people for now, but I mean many other people. So I'm glad you didn't ask, but now I answered.
Thank you for answering. Thank you for answering, and thank you so much for your time, Dezzy. I've enjoyed every bit of this conversation.
Me too. I really enjoyed your questions. I haven't had a conversation this good. I think we've been talking for almost 3 hours.
Hey, you've come to the end of the episode. It was a beautiful conversation, right? Well, if you got some value from that in any way, please do us a favor. Either like the video, subscribe to the channel, or share your thoughts in the comments. Most preferably, I'd ask that you share this with a friend, because I believe one of the best ways this channel is going to grow is by word of mouth. So if you got some value from this in any way, please share it with a friend. Thank you as you do, and until the next time we see, I wish you more life and more blessings.